There are a lot of fantastic UI and component libraries out there that work with Angular, and we are dedicated to supporting them. But at the same time, Google has a design philosophy called material design. And it was our goal to encapsulate the best practices from material design and make it easy for developers to take advantage of those things. And to help demonstrate and show some of the capabilities of material design and the material design components, I'd like to invite Kara Erickson up to the stage from the Angular team. Okay.
大家好，我是 Kara，我也是在谷歌的 Angular 组工作的工程师。我在美国出生，所以我说中文说的不太好，可是我会尽量说一点。所以我要做 Angular 的现场演示。今天我们要做一个约会应用程序，不过这个程序是为狗做的。用这个程序，你们的狗就可以找到它的理想对象了。我们不只用 Angular CLI 和 Angular Material， 而且用 Angular 的 API， 好像动画和表格。我已经用 Angular CLI 的 ng-new 做了一个新的程序，我也用了 npm 安装了 Angular Material。Oh, it's very cut off. Okay. Let's see. Okay. There we go. Okay. 否则你要等我安装很多的 dependencies， 那样就太慢了。然后我加了一些狗的照片。So 好，我开始做吧，因为有很多的技术上的术语，我要用英文。Okay, so this is going to be kind of a lightning demo, just to give you a taste of what it's like to develop with Angular and Angular Material. But all of the code will be available online on GitHub after the demo on my GitHub profile, Kara, so github.com/Kara. Okay, so since we use the Angular CLI, we can go ahead and serve right off the bat. And it will spin up a local server for us. So let's go ahead and wait for that to spin up. And on localhost 4200, we'll see the boilerplate text that comes with the CLI. All right, so now that we have everything kind of set up, let's talk about the application that we'll actually be building. So it's a dating site for dogs, as we mentioned. And so let's start by building the application scaffold. So we'll need a toolbar at the top that says the application name, navigation menu on the left that can have our navigation links for the site, and most importantly, the dog profiles that'll be in the middle, so your dog can find their desired dog. Okay. So let's put this over here. We're going to be using Angular Material to set this up. So let's start by setting Angular Material up. So when you use the CLI, it generates a module definition file for you. So these modules kind of come with it, these 3 modules. You'll also need to import the material module if you want to use material. Make sure that imported, yeah. And then call for root on it to make sure that it comes with all of the providers that it needs. Next, we need to add in the core styles for Angular Material. So in our styles.css file, which was also generated, we can go ahead and add Angular Material's core styles from its NPM package. And we chose the core styles that are pre-built with a theme here. So you can see it's indigo pink. And we want to import the material design font. This will allow us to add material design icons in a simple way. So normally we would just include the link here. But since we have low network connectivity, let's do it offline. So instead, we're just going to copy paste the actual style sheet that we would have loaded over HTTP. Okay, so now that we are all done with setup, we can go ahead and start changing the markup for our app component, so our main component. So let's start by building a toolbar. And we can use the material design component called MD toolbar. And we're setting the color to primary, which just means that it's going to take the primary color from the palette that we selected, so indigo, and put that into the background of our toolbar. So let's wait for this to refresh. You can see we have this nice puppy love toolbar. So next, let's go ahead and build out the side nav menu on the left. So if we want to open a side nav, we probably need a menu icon to let people know that they can click on it. So we have this lovely component called MD icon. And this allows you to use the code for a specific icon, and it will use the font that we loaded before to turn it into the actual icon. So you can see that with that line, we already have a menu icon just right there. You'll also notice that there's no margin here, and that's because we don't have margins for any of our material design components. And this is by design because we know that it'll depend on where you're actually going to be dropping it. So we let you set your own margins yourself. So here we're setting custom margin for the icon in the toolbar. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Next, let's make this into a button so that we can open up the side nav. So I'm just going to wrap the icon in button tags, and that's going to give it the default button styles. So we're also going to tag it with MD icon button so that we can override some of those. Okay, so now we need the actual side nav. So we have a component called MD side nav. So if we create a side nav layout and we put all of our existing HTML in there, we can go ahead and create the side nav with the side nav tag. I'm just going to put some boilerplate in there for now. Okay, so we can use this cool trick. So if we create a local template variable called side nav, when you click on the button, it can call side nav.open. So all that means is when you use the hash syntax, it's going to set the side nav variable to the side nav directive, and then on click, it's going to call the open method on that side nav directive. So if we click on it, you can see that we have the side nav, but it's not full screen. So let's go ahead and add the full screen attribute here. Let that refresh. Okay. All right, so now we have our side nav. So that's cool, but obviously we don't want this to be our content, right? We want a list of navigation links. So we have a component for that called MD side nav list, or MD nav list, excuse me. And nav list takes a list of anchors. So we can just add an anchor here. And each anchor is going to be a list item. So we're going to have two list items, one for your account page and one for your dog profiles. So each list item is going to have two lines, one with the name of the link. So in this case, it's going to be your account. So Wodajonghu. And then we also want a description here. And so we're just going to say Gongai Wodajonghu Xinqi. Okay. Okay, so for our second list item, we want our dog profiles, right? So we're just going to say Shuai de Gogo. And then here we're going to have a call to action. So we're going to say 找到你的对象. Okay. All right, so let's add that description class that we started. So we're just going to give it a separate color for some contrast. Okay. Wait for that to refresh. There we go. Okay, so now we have our two links, which hopefully you can see. I think it's a little cut off, but. Okay, so let's add some icons to the left of each link so you can see visually kind of what each link is going to represent. This is another thing that you can do really easily with the nav list. So we can use MD icon once again, and for a little account icon, we can use the assignment end icon. And we're also going to tag it with MD list icon so it's spaced appropriately for that context. And then here, we want a little paw print so that you can see that it's dogs. So we're just going to use the pets icon. Okay. All right, cool. So we basically have our application scaffold done. We have our toolbar, we have a side nav that opens with our links, but obviously we're missing all of the important parts, right? The content. So let's start by building our dog profiles. So we can create a container here. And each dog profile is going to be an MD card, so that's just like a little container for information. And we're gonna have a card for each dog in our dogs array. So we're gonna have to create that dogs array in a moment. And then each card, for now we're just gonna interpolate the dog's name. Oops. Dog.name. And then now we need to create this dogs array. So in our component definition, I've preloaded this dogs array, and it's just a list of Angular team dog names and the locations of all of their dog pictures that I already pasted in here. And then in our CSS, you'll recall that everything needs a margin, so I'm gonna add margins for the card. I'm gonna give it a width, and then to ensure that the cards are organized in a nice way, I'm just going to make its container a flex container. Okay, so let's wait for that to refresh. None of the CSS is there. Okay, there we go. All right, so now we have all the dog cards. So that's cool, but you can't really tell much about each of these dogs. Let's add a description for each dog. So cards also have a feature for card content. So we can add a card content container here, and we're also gonna give it a description class for contrast. And we're just gonna do a generic description for all of these because we don't have time to personalize it. Okay, so we're just gonna say, washer, and then we're gonna interpolate once again the dog's name. And then, let's see, 我喜欢去吃饭，跟我的朋友们去公园。Let's see, 玩和睡觉。Seems like dog stuff, right? Okay. 给我打电话. Okay. So we'll wait for that to refresh. Okay, cool. And you'll notice that each of the dogs has their name interpolated too. Okay, so what's a profile without an image for your dog to examine? So we can easily add images to these. So I'm just gonna get out of this. So we'll add an image tag. We'll tag it with MD card image. That just lets the card know to make it kind of full width. And then we're gonna take the source from our assets folder using the dog.image thing in our array. And then our alt text is just going to be the dog's name. The job can't. Okay. So hopefully the image will show up. Okay, nice. Now we have these lovely dogs. So next, let's create a way for your dog to interact with all of these handsome dogs. So we can create a card actions section. Oops, card actions section. And we're going to align it on the end. That just puts the buttons on the right side. And we're going to create 2 buttons, and they're going to be styled with MD button to make them look a little nicer, with the primary color of your palette, which is once again indigo. Okay, so we want your dog to be able to sniff the other dog. So this is going to be, oops, I can't type right now. 1 second. I think it's frozen. Huh. All right. Let me just, I might have to restart WebStorm. Hold on. There we go. All right, let's reopen this. Hope that I can type again. Still can't type. Okay. Come on. Oh, this is not good. Okay, I might have to restart this computer. I feel like this is not working. Okay, so let's go ahead and quit WebStorm. I'm gonna try one more thing. All right, so let's restart this. Please let me type. Okay, I think I might just have to restart my computer. Okay. Maybe we could try, let's open Stickies. No, nothing's working. Okay, I'm gonna restart. Yeah, why doesn't Steven do the slides while I see if I can get my computer to work? Okay, 1 second. All right, do you wanna switch back?
That never happens to any of us, does it? Where our IDE stops working? So, was anyone impressed with Kara? That was pretty awesome, right? So hopefully it's making sense at how easy it is to start using some of these things like the material design components that we're providing for you to make it easy to build applications with Angular. But one of the things that, once we've made it easy to build applications that we really care about is performance. Because performance is one of the things that matters more for our users than for us as developers. Because we tend to have very powerful machines, and our users tend to use mobile devices and very underpowered machines. But how do we think about performance? So we actually have a few different ways of looking at this. The first is size. How do we make smaller bundles, and how do we use lazy loading to load them as late as possible? And then on the speed side of things, how do we execute our programs faster? How do we do less, so run less code? How do we reduce the amount of memory we take advantage of? And more. So when we look back at the Angular 1x way of thinking, we would take your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and we would actually had a template compiler. Most people didn't know about this template compiler because it didn't have much functionality. At some level, we relied on the browser because we were not DOM independent. And so we would say element.innerHTML, and we would pass it a set of HTML to render out to the user. And then you would end up adding on top of that change detection, and then it would all make it out to the renderer in combination with kind of multiple runtimes for dependency injection, change detection, and the processing the view and all those events that you set up via your template. But if we look at how Angular 2 is different, we've pulled the compiler out as a separate component. And what that allows us to do is we actually generate views from that, and then those views contain all of the necessary change detection code or any of the event hooks or property hooks. And so the default mode for Angular developers today is what we call just-in-time compilation, where we ship the compiler down to the browser, and then in real time, on the user's device, we compile all of those HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files into JavaScript. So what happens is you write ng4 or you write a div tag, and that ends up becoming a document.create element in the most VM optimized way that we've found ways to. And so when we do this sort of compilation, we're doing it in a way that's optimized for all of the JavaScript virtual machines because they all work very similarly. But then it's also a massive improvement to change detection, up to 10 times faster. One of the ways that we measure performance is we have what we call a deep tree benchmark. So you've got a large tree with a lot of nodes on it. And so we built a version of this application using pure JavaScript, and we called that 1.x performance. And then we went back and built the same application using Angular 1, and it took about 5.7 times as long to run the change detection and to run this application. And then we built the same application in Angular 2, and it takes about 1.5 times as long as that hand-optimized JavaScript without any sort of optimization in the Angular 2 world. Another thing that we can do to take this even further is what we call ahead-of-time compilation. So because the compiler is now an independent component, you can actually do all of the compilation at build time instead of at runtime. And this is a very powerful thing because when you look at the bundle size of Angular, around 50 to 80% of your bundle is actually the Angular compiler. And so by not shipping that down to the browser and only shipping down that optimized JavaScript and removing all of the compilation steps from the user, you can get huge performance increases. So it's in AOT, it's still optimized JavaScript for virtual machines, but you're not relying on your users to do that compilation. And then you get to ship less code because of it. And so from a load time standpoint, when you compare just-in-time compilation to ahead-of-time compilation, it was about 335 milliseconds in just-in-time, and it was down to 130. And we're seeing very similar gains in terms of size, getting down to 49 KB in ahead-of-time compilation for our benchmark. But what does this actually mean in the real world? So there's a company called Lucidchart who builds diagramming software. And when they did the same just-in-time compilation to ahead-of-time compilation, they were able to eliminate the entire middle part of the graph. So this is a flame chart from the Chrome DevTools showing the processing that was going on in the browser. And so by eliminating all of that middle portion, the template compilation, the user's time to interactivity was much lower. And so they were benchmarking against their legacy editor, and when they added ahead of time compilation, they almost always got ahead of the legacy editor, but then when they combined the ahead of time compilation with something called Clojure compiler, and that's optimization that comes from Clojure, they were able to get always consistently better than their legacy editor. And then they were also able to get a bundle size down to about 27 KB for a small Hello World application. Another way that we're increasing performance is by lazy loading components and modules for you using our router. Routers form a very natural separation point between different parts of your application. And so using the CLI and using a Webpack plugin that we've built, we can actually code split for you and only load routes and the modules that represent those routes when the user navigates to them, meaning huge increases in performance by pulling things out of the critical path for the user. We also allow you to take control of change detection by leaving it always on, which is the default. Or you can specify that you only want to run the change detection cycle on push when the user is ready to do so. Or you can even detach entire components or component trees from that change detection process. And there's a number of other things that we're doing to make Angular much more performant. You can run 80% of Angular in a web worker, which takes it off of the UI thread. So most JavaScript is traditionally run on the UI thread in a single-threaded manner, and this allows you to access multi-threading. You can run it in a service worker and do offline, which means that the user doesn't have to wait for a network round trip to load your application. And we're working to get faster than that baseline that we mentioned. And we're also working to get the bundle size down to about 10K. And our director says that if we get to about 10K, he will bake us a cake. So we're very motivated. Currently, web workers and service workers are available, but we call them experimental. And we're still working to get faster than that hand-optimized JavaScript and that 10 KB Hello World. Unlike Angular 1, where documentation came much later than the project, we wanted to launch Angular 2 with kind of documentation day one, and we're very proud to have our own angular.cn domain name where we can host and connect with the Chinese community better. Lastly, community is very, very important to us. And so on GitHub, we were one of the top projects by contributor numbers. And currently, as of October, we had about 1.2 million developers looking at Angular 1 documentation, and we had about 600,000 developers looking at Angular 2 documentation, even only a month after our release. So that we're experiencing rapid growth, and we're very excited about this. And we're going to continue to invest in Angular 1 until these graphs switch, until the majority of the developers that we work with have migrated to Angular 2. We're also very reliant on a huge ecosystem of partners who train, who teach, and who build components and libraries that are part of our ecosystem. So we're hugely thankful to all these people, as well as the GDGs locally here in China, as well as Google Developer Experts, which is a program we're looking to expand across the globe. And then there's also a number of different applications that are already in production using Angular 2, such as Green Tea, which is a CRM within Google, Google Fiber, Azure Functions from Microsoft, and companies like Capital One and Fidelity Investments. So with that, Kara, would you like to continue? Okay.
Okay. I will ask them if they have any questions, right?
No, ask them if they want to see your demo.
Oh, okay. 哦，大家好，Kara 已经把他的那个设备重新调好了，然后我们继续看他的这个现场的演示，可不可以？啊 ，OK， 我们大家掌声鼓励一下。好，谢谢。
但是我们的时间只有2分钟。OK， 就是它需要多长时间？
Just go. Just go.
Go.
Do it.
很快. Okay. Let me see. All right. So I can type again. Something to be happy about. Okay. So where we were, just to remind you guys, is we were thinking about action buttons for our dogs to use. So the first one was for your dog to sniff another dog. So we wanted to say "xio." And then the second one was for your dog to bark at another dog. So we're going to say "wang." And we're also going to make these buttons just slightly bigger so you can see them on stage. So very quickly, I'm going to make the font size 20 pixels. And then we're going to wait for this to refresh. See, they're a little bit small on stage right now. Okay, cool. All right, so now that we have our action buttons, we have our dog profiles, let's start playing with some of the other APIs that we have, like forms and animations. So it'd be really cool if you could click on a dog name and it will turn into a text field so you can edit it. So we're gonna hook that up right now. So if we go back to the dog's title here, we can wrap that in a span. Oops, and we wanna close the tag. And when you click this span, we want to put the dog into edit mode, and we only want to show the dog title if the dog is not in edit mode. And now we want to add our text field, so we can use something called MD input for this, and we only want to show it if the dog is in edit mode, and when we blur the input, we can set edit mode to false. Okay? And then in our CSS, we want to make the transition pretty seamless, so we're going to make the font size the same for the input, and we're going to make its width 100%. And then since we're not having a placeholder, we can set the margin to 0 on the wrapper so that it is the same height. And then lastly, since we're overriding some core styles, we need to turn off view encapsulation. Because if we, it's there to help you in case you have unintended side effects, but in this case, we're intentionally overriding something, so we want to turn it off. Okay, so wait for that to refresh. All right, so now when you click on the name, it becomes a text field that you can type into. Obviously, we haven't put the form component in here yet. So if you remember, in Angular 1, there was ngModel. In Angular 2, we also have ngModel. So if we use the two-way binding syntax, we can just put in dog.name here. And then as soon as that refreshes, when we click on the name, it should pre-populate it, and it should be able to, you can see it filling in on the bottom there because it's updating in real time. So you can say Porter is magnificent, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a taste of forms. We don't have time to do much more than that. We can also do a very quick animations demo to make the cards fade in. It should only take a minute. So to do an animation, you want to name the animation on the element that you'd like to animate. So this is going to be the fade in animation. And then in our component definition, we can set the animation's metadata. And so we want to trigger an animation called fade in. And we want it to transition when it enters. We want it to start with a, oops, that's not what I want, with a style of opacity 0. We want it to animate for 750 milliseconds with an ease out curve. And this did not come in, so let's get that in. And then we want it to start or to end on a state where the style is opacity 1. Okay, so that was very quick, so let's hope that worked. Okay, so it's loading. There we go. So you can see the dogs fade in. Okay, so we have our material design components, we have some forms, we have some animations. Hopefully that gives you kind of a sense of what it's like to develop in Angular. So that's it for the live demo. Thank you for watching.
OK， 好，大家都知道什么叫手速之神了嘛？大家掌声鼓励一下那个 Kara。OK。
And that was the introduction to what's been new in Angular. 谢谢。
上午的部分咱们到现在就结束了，然后午餐的时间是在11点半到12点半之间。然后下午的我们这个会场开始的时间是12点半，然后午餐区是在4层，然后谢谢大家的收听，谢谢。